make sure you pay yourself. If you don't pay yourself, you can't survive. You're not actually being responsible as a producer because you need to be there for your film for years. And we just have to get better about paying ourselves in the indie film world. And I am saying that after years of not getting paid.
Hello and welcome to Off the Lot. The film industry is changing fast, and if you want to make movies, it's time to become your own gatekeeper. If you've got a vision and the drive to make it happen, this podcast is for you.
We're your hosts, Ken Kabatoff and Anthony Yap, and every week we dive into the hustle, challenges, and real-world strategies of independent filmmaking. We talk to directors, producers, and industry pros about what it really takes to get your film made.
So if you're serious about making movies, hit follow or subscribe. It helps us keep this going. And if you like what you hear, spread the word, share the episode, leave a comment, and help more indie filmmakers find Off the Lot. Let's dive in. Joining us today on Off the Lot is Amber Ripley, a Vancouver-based independent filmmaker and producer who heads genre-driven projects through her company Goodbye Productions. Over the past decade, she has built an impressive slate of Canadian films, from award-winning docs to cult favorite thrillers. Most recently, she co-produced Cryptic, a Canadian psycho thriller directed by Courtney Roy that premiered at South by Southwest.
At Goodbye Productions, Amber continues to champion unique voices, and she's just wrapped production on All Night Wrong, a new Canada-UK comedy thriller from director Jason James, starring Maria Bakalova and Zach Cherry, highlighting her knack for fresh, character-driven collaborations. Welcome, and thanks for taking the time to speak with us, Amber.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Amber, can you share a moment when you first realized that you wanted to get into this filmmaking business?
Early on, I loved creative stuff. I loved writing, but I wasn't really wanting to actually write books for a living. And I grew up in the era of music videos. I loved music videos, and just there's such an art form. So I was kind of like, how do you mix writing and visuals and story? And it's like movie making seems like the path to go down. So yeah, I knew pretty early on, and I went to film school. What I didn't know, and I think what a lot of people don't know starting out, is all the different avenues you can take to get into film. So that was really eye-opening when I went to film school and kind of just learned all the different aspects there were outside of writing and directing, actually.
It's such an interesting point, right? Like, what was the thing that made you choose, I want to produce on top of all of this?
I didn't want to produce. That's the interesting thing, because I thought that producing was boring, numbers, budgets. I hated math. It was not my thing at all. I wanted to be creative. And what I did learn, mainly by working with producers after I got out of film school, was that it is very creative. It's highly creative. You're right there on the ground with the director, with the writers, with the actors, but also just overseeing all aspects of a production is creative problem solving. And even financing is very creative, and budgeting is very creative, actually. It was really eye-opening. But yeah, starting out, I was like, I want nothing to do with producing at all. And then here I am, fell into it.
And what's sort of your favorite aspect of producing?
I think it really is being involved from the very, very beginning. Sometimes it's a concept that you're starting with, or just early stage scripts, but it's being there from the beginning to the very, very end of a project. It's a ton of work and a huge commitment, obviously, but it's very satisfying for me to be involved with every single aspect of film. I kind of compare it, it's sort of like you're the last one in the room shutting off the lights as the producer. Really, even the director's moved on sometimes, and you're still dealing with boring audit stuff and selling the film and getting reports and getting money. But yeah, you're really, really the last one on the ground with the feature film.
And often the first one as well. I mean, are you out there searching for IP, or looking for scripts, or just working with writers? Do you sort of have a roster of writers and directors that you like to work with? What's your process?
Yeah, I've been doing it a while now, so I do have writers I like to work with. I've worked with a lot of emerging directors and writers, so I like to do that, but also the idea is eventually we'll be doing more projects together, ideally. So yeah, there's people I like to work with, but I'm also always searching for new material, something different I haven't seen before. So if I get a good script that comes my way, it's very, very exciting.
And what do you look for in that new story and script?
I mean, first and foremost, it has to be something I would love to watch. I'm in the indie filmmaking world, so the nice thing about that is I really, truly get to choose what I make. So it has to be my taste. Unique, obviously, something we haven't seen before, but it has to have an authenticity to it. I love a good aesthetic, probably a little bit of absurdity. But yeah, definitely a filmmaker's signature has to be present. And that's really what I gravitate towards.
It makes such a huge difference. Also love to just take a step back a little bit. Like, so you went to film school and then you started working in the industry here in Vancouver. Is this where you're from originally?
Yeah, so I grew up in Alberta, small town Alberta, and then I moved to Calgary and I went to SAIT to film school. And SAIT is interesting because it's a tech school, so it's less theory based and it's more like you actually do learn what a DOP is and what a grip is. You learn to set up C stands, you learn about sound, and you kind of it's more like you can get into the trade side of filmmaking as well. But yeah, once I was done with SAIT, there wasn't really much of an industry in Calgary and Alberta at the time. Now it's booming there, but I wanted to go somewhere that where films were happening basically. So I went to Vancouver and started working here with production companies and producers.
On the independent side, or did you work in the service industry as well?
Independent side. So I worked with producers who were doing independent feature films. I started in features and I'm still in features, surprisingly, but yeah.
When did you get started being an indie film producer?
Producing my own films, it was probably around 2012. But when I started in the industry, it was early 2000s. So I was working with other producers on indie productions. And I didn't realize how rare it was in Vancouver, actually, in BC. It is more of a service industry. But yeah, just working with true indie producers was really eye opening for me.
Probably wearing a lot of hats, juggling a whole bunch of different jobs at that point, right?
Yeah, and really just learning the like you do have the creative control, the financial control when you're independently producing, which is obviously great in some aspects, but it's very stressful too. So I got to really see behind the curtain with how that process works because when you're working in service, you really are just kind of coming in to service a production and then going away and you're not really seeing all the behind the scenes stuff with getting that film together and financing it and all of that.
And as an indie producer, I mean, you are really a startup business with every single film.
Literally.
Yeah, that can't be great for stability. And like we were saying with service industry, you can kind of get a job, get work, build up a career in the industry. Whereas with an independent film, especially as a producer, you're kind of starting from virtually scratch every single time.
Yeah, like you are incorporating a new company for every film. Generally, once it gets greenlit, you're not doing that in development, but you're, I mean, just the actual logistical nightmare of juggling. I think I have like 12 or 13 companies right now. They're not all active because, you have a single purpose for one film, but you still have to file every year. And it's a lot of like you are literally a startup business for a couple years per film.
That is so interesting. That's something that nobody ever talks about is that, yeah, you start up a single purpose company for the film, right? Whatever film production limited. And yeah, you have to keep it going every single year and keep filing. I never thought about that before. And the more films you
Yeah.
make, the more companies you have.
It compiles. Yeah, it's a huge amount of work. And I mean, it's more work in the first couple of years because we're accessing tax credits generally for our films. So of course we have to do audits and file for a couple of years, but then there's still a few years that the company will still be active before you eventually let it lapse. But yeah, it does compile. It's a lot of work.
It seems like you spend basically the majority of your time just raising the money, just putting together the funding to put the project together. Because obviously, a film production, especially an indie film production, the production side of it is 4 weeks, 5 weeks out of the entire production cycle, and the pre-production in terms of hiring the crew and stuff is maybe another 4 or 5 weeks. So 2 years of your life, but most of it is spent in the pre-production stage, the development stage, and the post-production stage. So what's that like constantly having to churn up the fundraising side of your brain each time?
Yeah, it is interesting because I work a lot with Telefilm Canada, which is an application process. It's government funding, so it takes a while. I really know the deadlines and I kind of time everything out with there's a national fund deadline coming up, which is the bigger funding stream out of Telefilm, and then the regional deadlines are coming up, which is the smaller, more localized funding. So yeah, I kind of figure out well in advance which projects I'm probably wanting to take in, get those in. And then while you're waiting for 5, 6 months for those answers to come through, you're working on other stuff and maybe a production goes in there somewhere. But it really, really is juggling. I've had to do telefilm applications and sometimes Creative BC, there's other funding bodies we're applying to as well, but I've had to do them during production, which is not ideal, but you just have to constantly be getting in there.
Yeah. And are you picking some of the projects kind of when you see a project and you're like, "Oh, I really like this, but I'm not going to be able to take it to Telefilm because for whatever reason." Is that kind of one of the criteria you're looking at sometimes?
Usually, I mean, I've been quite successful with Telefilm. I've done 11 feature films and 9 of them have been Telefilm funded. So, yeah, it's quite a lot. I've had lots of no's from Telefilm too, but I generally now, when I look at projects, if it's a newer emerging filmmaker, I know that might be something for regional. I've got a couple I'm looking at right now that would not go in until next year at this point because they closed a few months ago. Generally these days I'm looking more at national level projects, which is above 3.5 million, because I need to be making bigger budget films now. I can't do the $1 million films anymore. It's not sustainable. So yeah, so I am thinking, is this something that can go to Telefilm, which is generally obviously Canadian filmmakers too.
What's your balance between, say, the telefilm projects? Like, do you have then projects that are like, no, okay, we have to try to finance this one privately, or is it relying more on telefilm because the structure is there and it does allow for a large contribution of your budget to come in from them?
I usually do go the private route anyways, even with Telefilm projects, but it would be for a smaller amount to close a gap in the financing. But the ones that have been truly privately financed were ones that got no's from Telefilm. So then we were like, well, how do we how do we make this anyways? And then it is harder in a lot of ways to go totally the private route with a smaller Canadian film, but that's generally when we've done that because we're stubborn and we want to get films made.
You want the movie to get made. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it is a shame. So you do all this work and especially these applications for Telefilm and you get into them. And if they don't come in, you still want the film to have a life and get made. You believe in the film.
But is that kind of the name of the game in Canada of just trying to figure out like a few projects that might go and sort of seeing what yes you can get, and then you might submit like 8 projects or 5 projects a year, and one of them might go in.
I'm being a bit more selective now. In the past, I've gone in with, I think 3 or 4. I mean, I was peripherally involved in a couple. They weren't my companies, so it's hard to kind of quantify. But I'm generally now trying to keep it to 1, maybe 2 per deadline.
That's really interesting. And so let's talk about Cryptic, which is exciting because that is a movie that may have come out by the time this airs, which is later May, unless you can tell us the release date.
It's May 9th.
It has already come out. So hopefully
Yeah,
people have
great.
seen Cryptic, but if not, go
Well,
see it. Yeah.
yeah, it's going to come out May 9th. We've got some theaters that are screening it in Canada, and then it'll also be coming out digitally. So you can find it digitally as well after May 9th. Yeah.
How this movie came together, if you can, talk about the development and run us through, because this is so exciting.
So Courtney Roy is the director of Cryptic and Paul Bromley's the writer. Paul is based in the UK. Courtney is Canadian, but she's based in Paris. So she reached out to us with the project. It was like back in 2021, I think. She's a photographer, a very talented photographer. Highly recommend checking out her work. She shoots herself in different characters, and she's just a really interesting, has kind of like a fantasy Lynchian vibe to her work. So yeah, she reached out with the project. My co-producer Josh got it first and he reached out to me and was like, I think you would really like this. We should look at it. And so I checked out her work, loved that, and then read the script and I was like, yep, this is a great project. I really want to get involved. Telefilm deadline was about a month away at that point. So we met with her over Zoom and we were like, it's a really strong project. We should probably try for Telefilm. It probably won't get in first round, but let's just go for it. And it's great to build the application and have all those pieces together anyways. And she was cool to go for it. So we put together our application, but the immediate challenge we ran into was the writer was UK, not Canadian, which means the only way you can access Telefilm funding is you have to be a Canada UK co-production. So we had to go in as a co-production. This is not a lot of time. And we ended up, we needed a co-producer as well. So we ended up finding our UK co-producer, got her to commit with a letter. She really understood the process because they deal a lot with the BFI funding there. So she was like, put my name on it. It's fine. Like, I love the project and let's just formalize. Like, we'll really figure it out later if we get funding. Got in under the wire and then they funded us, basically. So we were like, all right, I guess we're doing a Canada UK co-production with producer, writer, director we haven't met in person. Like, they're out of the country, but let's do it.
That's amazing. And so when Telefilm comes in, this is on at the national level, correct?
This was regional, actually. Yeah, because it was Courtney's first feature film. She's done photography and some short films, but she'd never done a feature before.
Okay, and so they come in around like, is it 49% or something? Depending on the budget level, I guess it's different.
Yeah, I mean, they can come into up to 49%, but generally, I think they like you to apply for around 30, 35% is
Mhm.
what they'll want to commit around, but it's all case by case, of course. Yeah, so I think that's around what we were applying for at that point.
You guys went into production on that in 2022?
2022. Yeah. So once we knew we were funded, Courtney knew she wanted to shoot. It was based in Hope, the film. So she obviously is from Canada. She grew up in North Bay, but she went to Emily Carr and spent a lot of time in BC as well. And she's done some really great photo series where she's gone to Prince Rupert, and one was based in Hope. And so we kind of used her photography work for our concept books that we were doing for the film. And really, when you read the script, you're like, yeah, this feels, there's such a sense of place to it. But the writer had never been to Canada, so we felt like it was a good idea to bring them out and do a very early scout, go to Hope, start looking at different locations. And her process is really interesting because as a photographer, she wanted to do a photo shoot for the film, which wasn't the film, but it was her kind of like creating the character in the film who's a doppelganger. It's two different females, or maybe it's one to watch the film. But so she was basically shooting herself, like emulating that character in Hope, and we used that to build a updated deck for financing.
What was the timeline between hearing about Telefilm to, say, pre-production? Because you had to find the rest of the financing. How long did you give yourself for that?
Not so much how much we gave ourselves, but how long it took is usually what it is. So it was about a year. We knew they were in. Paul and Courtney came out, and we did that scout, and we had a notes call with Telefilm, which was really great because they still wanted to see some changes to the script, and we wanted to see some changes as well. We wanted to push it a little more genre than it was initially, and I think that's really, really been an asset to the film, definitely. So yeah, it was about a year of casting, working on the script, and really just getting the rest of the financing pieces together because co production is more complex, obviously. There's thresholds you have to meet. There's, 20% of the spend and financing has to be going through the UK. So we were kind of trying to get into the BFI for a while, but that didn't really, it was just challenging with a Canadian director, not a British director, and it's so competitive. So we didn't get a lot of traction there. So we really had to go out and figure out how we were going to find our last pieces of financing.
Does that mean that the money has to come from the UK then too, or just that it has to be spent through there?
A little bit of both. So it should be coming from the UK, but in our case, they were a minority and they were really 20%, like quite low. So we moved post production there. But if you can't get, say, BFI funding, tax credit we accessed obviously in the UK for our spend there. What you do end up doing often is taking, say, private financing, like private equity, which we did have some of, and you can move that through any country in a co-production, which really helps. So that's how we did it in the end.
Yeah, it's always so fascinating because for Canada, it's such a system of trying to piece together almost like a Hydra approach towards putting financing together. You don't have that studio model or anything to go with. So this is kind of like this is sort of when people say like, why do you do it this way? We're like, well, this is just like how we get it done because trying to find a way to get 10% of it here, 20% of it there, and if you have to move post production to Quebec or to Europe to make it work, then that's just what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, co-production's interesting because in Canada we are more used to piecing financing together. So we work well with the Europeans actually because they are constantly co-producing. There's a lot of smaller European countries that have to co-produce in order to finance films. So in my experience doing co-productions, there's already kind of a shorthand there with European producers where we're like, yeah, we're going to have to like have 14 different pieces and like here's the regulations with this country, and it boggles your mind a little bit because it's this shifting puzzle, but that's what we're used to doing. Whereas I found a little more with American indie producers, they are not used to that system at all, and it's very complex for them.
Yeah, for them, it's like, money come from here, spend it here, and there's no because they don't have a grant system or anything like that anyway.
Yeah.
Like the government's not putting funding into the project. The tax credits they get maybe, but that's the only thing that they're really balancing it with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it gets wildly complex. The more countries you put in as well, it gets very complex with their regulations, and you're kind of blending cultures too a bit, which is a whole other challenge. But Canada, UK, going back to cryptic, it's a little easier because it's English speaking countries. We're culturally more similar, and it's just a really easy fit.
And did you already have that relationship with the production company in the UK?
Not at all. We got so lucky. There's a few things on this film where, I mean, it's been very hard too, but we had these great partners. My co-producer Sophie Venner, I'd never met before, but we were just very similar taste wise. She loved the script as much as we did, and just similar places in our career. And she'd worked a lot with the BFI. I've worked a lot with Telefilm, and then ironically, we had both worked with the same producer in Belgium on different projects. And we found out afterwards that we had this producer in common we'd worked with as well, who we did try to bring into the project at one point. We were trying to go to Belgium too, but it didn't end up working out. So yeah, just really fortunate circumstance on that one.
And did you guys have a distributor already attached before the project?
No, we Game Theory is our Canadian distributor, so they came on board after Telefilm came in. Telefilm really was like first in on this one, and then we started building it all, which isn't always the case. But they came on board. Josh Hutzlak is my Canadian co-producer, and we had done a film called Ash a few years prior that we worked with Game Theory on, so we already had a relationship there. Hillary Hart at Game Theory is amazing and just really liked the project. So they came in pretty early on. And then we did end up also working with XYZ Films, and they've been a huge champion of the project. That was interesting because we moved forward, went into production, and they saw an early cut of the film before they were able to commit to it. So we did kind of have to take some risks with this one where there were certain holes in our financing that we were hoping we were going to close once we hit post, but not an ideal way to be making a film. Definitely bad advice. Don't do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
We'll figure this out later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't worry about it.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
not fixing the film in post, you're fixing the money in
the
post.
financing. Yeah, yeah. It was just a very complex. We were waiting so late for the BFI Global Screen Fund, I think is what it was. So there was a small gap that we didn't have, but we had to roll forward with production just because of many things like cast availabilities, and we were trying to hit a window before it was winter, and so we didn't know if they would come in, but we were confident enough that we could figure out that gap if they didn't come in, which we fortunately did with XYZ.
I found on so many indie films that I've worked on where all I see are the producers just sitting there at the last, in the last week or two, or even the day before, saying, "Oh, we finally got the financing closed and we're ready to go."
Yeah.
And you kind of go like, "Wait, does that mean you didn't before we weren't ready to? Does that mean we potentially like this thing was we've all been working towards this thing? It's not that like not
you know,
nefarious intent, but it's more like that idea of like, oh wow, like it's literally hanging by a thread until the last piece of the puzzle gets put in.
Yeah, I mean, it is that it's you have all your financing, but the closing too is you have your financing on paper, but things like tax credits, generally a portion of telefilm or other soft money, if you have a minimum guarantee from a distributor or sales company, they don't just write you a check and you go make the film. They commit to your project, but the distributor pays you a window after you deliver the film, which is well after the film is finished. Tax credits generally pay out, it can be up to 18 months after your audit and filing. So you have to go generally to a bank or somewhere and interim finance your production. And so that process is not always the simplest process. So that's the closing where your financing is there, but the actual physical money isn't there yet. So that generally, if it's taking a long time or if it's complex, sometimes you don't close until into production, which is not ideal, but happens a lot. It's just that then the cash flow gets the cash flow crunch, definitely, because you're spending a lot of money when you get into production.
That's something that also that other producers we've spoken to maybe haven't really talked about too much. Like, what is that timeline? Like for somebody that's, waiting on Telefilm right now to get a response from Telefilm with this regional application that has closed. Like, okay, Telefilm is going to fund a portion of your film. What should they expect next? For it, maybe they're not as experienced as you are, maybe making their first feature or something like that. Like, what's the next step?
Yeah, because it is quite complicated. So when Telefilm comes into your film, it's generally the creative minds that are looking at the project. I know they're looking at the business side too, but really it's like creatively, are we getting behind this project? How much money are we allocating? And then once you get that yes, you move over to an analyst who's assigned to your project. And then they really dig into the business side of it. And issues can come up that don't come up at the application stage that you really have to get on top of. But yeah, they'll start digging into your financing. They'll want to see that you've got the financing. They'll want to dig into things like even nationalities of writers is like that's something you have to be really careful about, but making sure that you are Canadian, that you're going to be on side with Cavco and meeting the point system, and that there's a lot of rules and regulations you have to do properly to be a Canadian content project so that Telefilm can fund you. So they really start that due diligence. And I say at that point, that's when you really want to make sure you're going in with a producer to Telefilm, but you need that person who understands that process and can close Telefilm. I would say the other thing, because Telefilm is often coming in quite early into indie projects, is that they give you a timeline in which you have to finance your film because you don't usually go into them with everything else in place. Often you need that Telefilm commitment to go to a distributor, to go to other places and get more money because they can see you've got this Telefilm support. So they will, I mean, they have a deadline which you need to close them and have all of your pieces in place and be well aware that you have to be on top of that.
Something like a year or so?
I think it's sooner. It's generally less than a year. Like you'll get your commitment letter and there will be a deadline. But in my experience, you just have to be in contact with your analyst. And as long as you're putting pieces together, like sometimes you have to wait for certain casts or whatever it is. Usually you can get extensions granted if you're in good communication with them and they can see that you're putting the project together. You shouldn't just sit on it. Like there's money there, but they have to spend that money within certain timeframes. It's government money. So you have to really hit the ground running and start financing your film because it takes a long time sometimes, a lot of the time. Yeah, if you're trying to go to a broadcaster for pre-license, like they're not just usually going to give you an answer in a couple of days. Like there's a whole process there you have to go through, and you have to allow time to get answers. And if that's a no, you're going elsewhere.
Everything in this business takes so long, always. Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing with actors too, right? Like you go out to an actor and I mean the agents work 8 to 5, or 9 to 5 and and they take vacations, and if they are on vacation, you might not hear back for a month or something like that on an actor, and when you do hear back it'll be oh, we'll think about it, and so you're constantly pushing things, waiting for that next step because you're spending all this time like I just want to make this movie happen, and I rely on all these people to make it work.
Yeah, it's so true. And especially if it's the summertime and you're trying to cast, it's the worst. Nobody's in the office. Yeah, until you hit prep. And then if you haven't, usually you should have your leads cast at that point. But if you don't, then you really are pushing and you have to do like 48-hour offers. And then you're getting more traction because there's this urgency because it's a film that's going to be off the ground soon.
I'm curious with your films. I'm assuming that when you've gotten Telefilm money, most of the time, if not all the time, it's the private equity side of things, or is it sort of the grant, or have you chosen different options based on
I've always done the private equity with Telefilm.
how does that work exactly in the long term once you make a film with Telefilm?
Like in terms of the recoupment
Yeah.
with Telefilm? Yeah. So it depends on your budget level. If you're below 2.5 million, it's actually a lot easier with Telefilm. They just take 10% of what comes into the producer for a certain period of time, which is great. You just have to be really careful that you're always under 2.5 million though, because if your budget ends up going over that, then they take like full recoupment on the equity tier in your waterfall, basically.
Oh, okay.
So they're treated, yeah. So they're treated as equity. If you have other equity partners in the film, they'll have to be pari passu with Telefilm equity as well. So that's something to be aware of. If you're getting things like Gap, they generally want to take a small corridor in that, but you can negotiate that with Telefilm directly. But they'll want to take a small percentage generally on a first tier.
They're basically wanting to at least get some first money, but you can talk to them about how that works.
Yeah, I don't want to say they're generally pretty flexible. Like they have rules, obviously, but you work with your analyst on what makes the most sense based on your film's recruitment structure.
How have things changed maybe since you first started to what it is like now in the Canadian sort of indie film landscape?
Um, oh, that's a good question. I think, well, I mean, obviously streaming came in and that's changed everything, and that's a whole conversation. I think the theatrical model has obviously changed because of that, but Telefilm still does rely on a theatrical model in Canada to a certain extent. So what I think works a little bit better, and something we're doing with Cryptic actually, is leaning into more event screenings to help launch the film and build a buzz for it. But also, I think the day and date works quite well for smaller films sometimes. We don't need this long window where I just don't think people are always going to the theater to see smaller films. If you lean into these event-based screenings, there's buzz there and people might want to find it on digital right away. So I think the
Right.
day and date actually can work quite well for smaller Canadian films, and hopefully is great for this one. And that's a newer model.
The idea being then that you have that sort of like that weekend of like, Q&A sessions and all these sort of like, red carpet and step and repeats and all these things. And that weekend or a day or two later, it's like the movie's available on a platform somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I don't know that. I mean, you want to get out to the theater if you can, but if you can't and you still really want to check out a film and it's out there and it's top of mind and you can find it right away, I think that's a great way to get more exposure. But yeah, what we're doing for Cryptic is May 9th, we're having a live score screening at the Van City. So our composer, Kane McKenzie, who's done an amazing score for this film, it's an all electronic, like just very much a character in the film, I would say. He's going to come out and he's going to perform the score live with the film for an audience just on the Friday. And the director is coming out as well, and she's going to do a Q&A with Kane afterwards. So it's probably more music focused, but it'll, yeah, it's a little bit outside the box.
Yeah, that's a very cool way to do it. And that's the thing you're not going to get anywhere, right? Like you're not going to get that on a streaming platform and everything. So you create a demand for an event that is a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. So May 9th at the Van City Theater for Cryptic, this live composing screening. That's a great idea. And then so you do that, and then what's the next step for Cryptic at that point?
Yeah, so the Friday will be the live score screening. We'll also be there, I believe it's the Saturday through the Tuesday. So those who can't make that screening, you can still see the film. It's just regular screening at the Van City. And then it's out on digital platforms as well. And there is also going to be an event in Toronto at the Paradise Theatre May 8th, and that's being sponsored by Letterbox. I think it's like an invite only thing. Our distributor's been building, we've been working with them, but Game Theory's been building this. But they're bringing out the director for that as well and doing some press and a Q&A afterwards. But it's kind of like an exclusive thing they're doing in Toronto as well.
Very cool. And which digital platforms can we find it?
It'll be like Apple, iTunes. Yeah.
Yeah, and it will be released kind of the same time, like that's where people will be able to see it.
Yeah, as of the 9th. Yeah. And then we're still waiting to hear. I think it's going to be at the Mayfair in Ottawa as well on the 9th. And we're waiting to hear about other cities. So we should hopefully know soon. And then it's also releasing in the US. Wellgo is our US distributor, and they're releasing it digitally on May 9th as well.
Cool. So Cryptic, check it out.
Yes, check it out.
That's so great. So you're in post-production right now on a film called All Night Wrong.
Yes.
And what can you tell us about this whole process? Because it's not out yet, but what can you share about this film?
Yeah, it's a film I'm doing with Jason James, who's a producer director I've worked with a few times. This is actually our third film we're doing together. It's got Zach Cherry from Severance in it, and Maria Bakalova, who is nominated for an Academy Award for Borat 2, and she's in The Apprentice, and just a really fun comedic duo. And then we've got Tyler Levine and Emily Hampshire in the film too, so it's kind of a fun ensemble. But yeah, it's a couple that goes on a Tinder date that's not going well, and they end up accidentally stealing a car that has a body and a bunch of money in the trunk, and then it's just a night of absolute chaos as they try to figure out what's going on and what to do about the body and the money that they've picked up accidentally. It's like a comedy noir, all takes place over one night. Yeah, so it's in the can. We're in post-production. This is also a Canada-UK co-production, so that seems to be what I've been doing a lot of lately. Yes, it's different partners than Cryptic, but very similar structure in that we're doing the post-production in the UK, shot the film in Canada. And yeah, we're plugging away in post right now, and hopefully it'll be out. We'll be hitting the festival circuit hopefully later this year, and the film should be coming out next year.
And you shot this in Interior BC, right?
We shot it in Invermere and Radium Hot Springs. So it's the Columbia Valley area in the Kootenays in BC, which is quite far from
Yeah,
Vancouver.
yeah, and
Yes.
it's a hotbed of film production resources, I'm sure.
It's, yeah, quite, they learned a lot. We all learned a lot going out there, but,
What was the choice to shoot it out there? I'm from the Kootenays, so
you are.
I'm
Where are you
from the
from?
I'm from just outside of Nelson, in the West Kootenays.
Oh, great. Oh, I love it
So
out there. It's so beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah. So we tried to fund it with, this is when we went to Telefilm with, at the national level. We weren't successful, unfortunately. We will hopefully get some amount from them at some point. But when they didn't come in, we were like, well, how do we make this film? We already had the cast attached, so we kind of knew we were at a certain budget level, and we had other pieces of financing in place. So I ended up going to Sarah Shack, who is Anamorphic Media. She brings in investors for films, basically, but we'd done a film previously the summer of 2023. And she was trying to launch, or is trying to launch, a film fund in the Columbia Valley. So it's all private driven. It's essentially investors out there who they want to invest in films, but they also want to launch a film industry in the region. And so the incentive is bringing films out there. We get some private equity. So it's structured as true private equity, but the essentially condition is we have to go out there to shoot the film. So she knew that I've done a lot of films in remote places in BC. Anthony knows this very well. We worked
Yes,
on a film
yes.
in Prince Rupert together. I've done Powell River. Cryptic was Hope, Manning Park, Agassiz, in the end, Sunshine Valley. So that kind of region. So I'm not afraid to go to remote places to shoot films. And also Jason shot a film in Kitimat. He shot a film in Revelstoke. Like we were the perfect combination, I think, to be like, let's be crazy and go to this place
Yeah.
we've never been to
Yeah.
and
We
make
know
a film.
the roadshow
Yeah.
mentality. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that is the hurdle. There's money out there. It's a stunning location. Like it's an amazing production value wise. It's beautiful, but you have to get over the hurdle of it's 9-10 hours from Vancouver. There's not really an airport there. You're flying people to Calgary or Cranbrook, but really Calgary is 3 hours away from Invermere. So you have to build in those costs because that's not cheap. Like it comes with a price tag, but we kind of like the adventure of it. And we weren't afraid to go out there and do the film. So that's why we went there.
All at night too, right?
Yep. It was all at night. So that was another thing. It's in the title, All Night Wrong. Should have known. It all takes place over one night. Yeah.
How long was your production?
It was 4 weeks of shooting. And I mean, obviously, you always end up doing some nights, but I have never done a film that was all nights every single day over 4 weeks. Like you truly do start to lose your mind after that many nights. It's shift work. So yeah, it was tough doing that. And then it also snowed the first weekend. So we were fully out there in the snow and the cold and shooting like until the sun came up quite frequently.
That's so tough. Yeah, I've done, maybe a week of nights, maybe a week and a half, like max, but 4 weeks of nights. You're Al Pacino in Insomnia or something at that point.
It does something to you, definitely.
I think then the sequel should be All Day Wrong, and
Yeah.
Yes.
no nights.
No more night
Yeah.
films. I know. It's just funny when
Yeah.
you're like, we developed it for so long too. It was like years of development. And we're like, we kind of knew what we signed up for, but you just don't really think about it until you get into prep. But the crew had a surprisingly great morale. It was tough, but we got through it. And I feel like the snow brought some production value, which is great. It wasn't easy to be out in it, but it does add something. And the film's working. So that's the most important thing. Yeah.
You bring up a good point, like soup to nuts on a film like that. Like how many years are you spending working on it from like the moment you get introduced to like the anticipated release?
Such a good question. Again, with indie features, it can be years. I think All Night Wrong, we first looked at the script in 2020, and obviously there was a pandemic happening, so there wasn't a lot happening at that point. But we did try for a long time to cast it, and yeah, it was about what we're 20. So yeah, 4 to 5 years until we actually got it financed. Yeah.
Are you finding that's like kind of is that typical or is that longer or?
No, that's pretty. It can be. I shot a film in 2023, The Bearded Girl. We're just applying to festivals right now. It's done, but that was like 5-6 years of development as well. I would say years for sure. I think Cryptic recently is a faster one, but even that was still a year and a half, 2 years before we were in production.
And is that all because of financing? Like you're just like the money just is coming together, or are you doing a lot of script development during that time and a lot?
It's a bit of both. Yeah, I generally feel like you have to go through some script development. You have to get it as good as possible before you're starting to cast and finance it. So it's partly that, and then it is the timelines of the financing because we are often going for telefilm, and that takes time. And I do have multiple projects that have gone back to telefilm. So we've gone in once and we got the no, and we continue to develop and find pieces, and we've gone back to them and been successful a second time around. So that takes a while.
Is that a good lesson though for like producers like that have like their own projects out there that if they get a no from Telefilm, that doesn't necessarily mean the project's dead. It just means you need to keep working at it.
I think so. I mean, you should they'll generally give you some feedback. It's good to speak with them directly and kind of try to gauge if it feels like something that was close. Two of the projects I have were shortlisted before, so it definitely was close and they were encouraging. And if we agree with the feedback and feel like we can push it in that general direction, then yes, absolutely. I think it makes sense because you're showing them that you're invested, you're aligned with what you want the film to be, and they do want to support. If you're not aligned in the feedback, I think you might have a bigger issue there. Yeah.
So, they're involved in the development process. You get your analyst creative feedback early on. Are they involved creatively throughout the process or like in post production? What does that look like in terms of telefilm and as far as like final cut and, the finishing touches of a movie?
Yeah, they are involved in the process, but it's quite nice with them. They certainly don't have a final cut or anything like that, and they're generally not giving you prescriptive notes where you have to do this thing. Like when they're in, they're in, they're going to support. But I found their notes to be very insightful sometimes. And it's usually giving feedback on the script. And we have script conversations. Even after they come in for production, they might want to see some changes in the script. And then it's showing them rough cut of the film. So they're looking at cuts and giving feedback. And that's generally the extent of it. But it's helpful actually to have that feedback. And they see so many projects and they understand the Canadian film industry, and it's just nice to get their creative feedback most of the time. But they're pretty hands off in terms of like they let you do what you want to do. Once they're in and supporting you, they trust the director and the producer, and they just want you to make a good film.
Yeah, as long as you're delivering the film that they paid for or that they gave you money for, like as long as you don't stray wildly from from the
Yeah,
original
you don't go
idea, then
rogue. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you did that, you'd probably have more problems with your distributor and your sales
that's true.
than you would
It's the
with
same
telefilm.
problem. Yeah,
Yeah, they're going to
yeah,
have bigger issues with it, most likely.
yeah.
But I think getting notes from sales is a little bit different because they'll give creative notes, but that's more like it's marketing. It's how are we reaching the audience? Are you delivering the film that we signed up for? And that's a more extensive hands-on process generally than with a telefilm or funding body.
Yeah, like they can kind of force your hand a little bit more, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it's just that it is a little more like we need this fixed before we can do what we need to do.
Very much
Mhm.
so. Yeah. And you do need them to be selling your film and behind it. So it's very challenging when you're not aligned on what's happening with the creative direction.
So I guess looking ahead, where do you sort of see things going in the next 5 years? Being on the ground floor of like indie film and just seeing, how the landscape has shifted in the last 5 years on the big Hollywood side of things, and the ripple effects that we're seeing within indie film, but also the opportunities, the new opportunities that are out there as far as self distribution or streaming on demand, the different options, and working with distributors in a hybrid way. Just all of that, where do you see things going for yourself and other filmmakers?
Yeah. I mean, for myself, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the political side of things in Canada over the next little while. And does that change telefilm? Does that change our funding system in Canada? Because I've been fortunate, but we're relying a lot on the Canadian funding system. And I think just figuring out how to make films more outside of that system is probably smart. I'm more talking about funding than distribution, but I love that were trying to get this funding in the Columbia Valley or different areas in BC. I think just getting more private into Canadian films, pushing economic development is a way to go about putting financing together for films. Yeah, in terms of distribution, I think I don't know. I know there's more Canadian more indie producers doing self distribution and getting support for that, and it's not something I've ventured into myself yet, but I think there's opportunities there too for sure. And cultivating an audience before, like as you're developing a film and really thinking about where you're going with it is so important these days, I think.
It used to be we could finish the film and kind of let the world take it over from there, or let your distributor take it over from there. And now we have to have a little bit of a marketing savvy or marketing ability ourselves. I heard someone say it's like, getting your film out there is actually the easy part, because it's possible to get on any platform tomorrow. And if you really are just like, I just want eyeballs on it, you could upload it to YouTube and people could see it, but you're not going to make any money on that necessarily. So it's really about figuring out, how do you find the audience for the film so that all these stakeholders get what they came for.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And finding the audience, again, when you're even at script stage, like who's the audience for this film? It's not just telling your story, it's who wants to hear this story and how do we get it out there, and just be kind of building that into your plan early on, not making the film and then being like, all right, where's the audience for this film?
I heard this great story the other day about Akio Morita, who's co-founder of Sony. And decades ago, when this is just post-war Japan, they were building these little tiny radios, miniature radios. And this eventually led to the technology that was the Walkman. But they had these little portable radios, and they're like, well, they weren't selling well. And they had to find their consumers. Little recording devices, sorry, not radios. But point is, they had to find these people, and they found out that after the war there was this like great decrease in stenographers working. So this little recording device really helped them tap into that market, because people were able to record all of these little things, and that was them finding their audience. And I'm like, oh my god, that's so true about filmmaking, right? Like, you make a movie, it's not going to be for everybody, but you have to find that niche little audience that can tap into it, build the buzz, build the marketing around that, and then expand from there.
Yeah, it's so important, I think. Again, going back to Cryptic, like that film initially, I loved it. It wasn't as genre as it became. It was more of an art film that had like kind of monstery body horror elements. But
Sure.
I do remember early on, we were like, we feel like we should push this into the genre world a bit more. And there's an audience that we can tap into with this that we're not quite hitting, and it needs to feel violent and satisfying too, because that's what you want, I think, with some of the dark elements in that film. So we worked for a while on the script to push it in that direction, and we all love it. Like, it kind of became this, it's still a very weird arty genre film, but it has like a nice violent climax that's very satisfying. That film did go to South by Southwest, and it was on the genre festival circuit. So it was at like Fantasia and Neuchâtel and Sitges, and it's really found that, like, I guess, feminist body horror audience that it was meant for all along. But I don't know that it was there initially.
And how important do you think the festival circuit is right now for a film like that? Like, was your premiere of a real important thing to hold on to, where exactly you premiered, or just hitting those genre festivals was the key itself?
The premiere was important, and South by Southwest was the world premiere. So that really helped to launch the film. It's huge. Yeah. Yeah. So it was in the midnight program, obviously. But our plan was always to hit the genre festival circuit no matter what. But that really launched it on the genre festival circuit.
And how long was your festival run?
It was March 2024, South by Southwest. And then Whistler was one of the last films, 2024. So it was basically the year of 2024. The genre festivals are really great for finding the audiences, like especially like a Fantasia. It's just they really love movies. They're really invested in the Q&As, and it's just like such a fun, satisfying experience to go to those festivals. And people get very vocal and like interactive with the films too, which is
Oh, that's
pretty
the
fun.
best. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's really nice. It's different than obviously some of the bigger festivals you go out to that are very prestigious and fancy, but I love genre festivals. You just really connect with your audiences in a different way.
Well, that's the thing. You're getting audiences for those that are like really into the genres, right? Like, they aren't filmmakers, right? Like a lot of festivals sort of cater to the film industry. but these festivals are catering to the audience. You're finding your reviewers, you're finding your advocators there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Amber, as we're wrapping up here, because we've taken up so much of your time and this has been so fun and so enlightening, we often ask our guests, for one piece of advice for any filmmaker or maybe up and coming producer who maybe doesn't even know they will become a producer. One piece of advice that you can share.
This is probably specific to emerging producers, but also directors who kind of end up wearing both hats. I just want to say, when you reinvest your fees, which does happen a lot, consider that it might be an investment early on for your first films. We've all done it, and it's important to do to get your films out there sometimes, but do not make that your model for financing. Don't build financing plans with reinvestments in them off the top. It does end up happening sometimes. Reinvesting meaning like your fee goes back into the film and you don't get paid. Make sure you pay yourself. If you don't pay yourself, you can't survive. You're not actually being responsible as a producer, because you are there. You need to be there for your film for years. And we just have to get better about paying ourselves in the indie film world. And I am saying that after years of not getting paid. So guilty. But yeah, definitely something I wish I would have considered more, or somebody would have told me more in the beginning, is just be careful when you're putting fees back into a film, and just make sure you cover yourself as much as you can.
You have to be able to live and eat. And if you have to take a shift job just to survive, then that's time you're taking away from making the film in the first place, right?
And I think there's this mentality that, you have to put everything you can possible into the film because it's your film and it's your baby. But if you're financially stunting yourself, then you're actually hurting the film in the long run too, and your future films. So it's just good to kind of make sure you have some kind of sustainable model and keep yourself going, support yourself.
That's so smart. And it is so common early on, right? Of like, okay, we're just going to make this film as cheap as possible. We'll put in our fees. And sure, like for the first one, okay, understandable. You have to prove yourself, right, to the world. But yeah, later on, please protect yourself. Like, yes, you have to put food on the table. And it also shows that that you're worth what the fee is to make this movie. You're good enough, and you're saying, no, I can make it, and pay me what I'm worth.
Yeah, I think it's a self-respect thing a bit too, where for me, it was just always making sure everybody else got paid and you're the last one. And that still kind of is the case, but do make sure you get paid and you are respecting yourself as a working producer, because we work harder than everybody sometimes. So it's just a good thing to be mindful of when you're starting out for long term.
Especially because the back end isn't really something you're ever going to rely on too much anyway. Like it would take a long time for that back end. Like if you have that back end built in, the profits are never going to be enough to cover the work that you put in.
Especially on first films too. And I mean, I'm working with a lot of emerging as well. So it's really about kind of launching and getting the first films out there. And you can't really think of it as like, maybe it'll hit and make a ton of money, but probably not. That's not really what we're trying to do with new films, I don't think.
That can't be your main motivation anyway, right? Like your main motivation can't be that, we're going to try to hit that bullseye of a target that someone else hit so that we can all cash out. And
yeah, it's like winning the lottery. Exactly. Yeah. And you've got investors sitting in front of any sort of back end. Like there's just so much that sits in front of it too.
Before you see a dollar, you're basically, everybody else is taking their piece anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, thank you so much for this. This has been so great. And we really appreciate you coming on and talking with us.
Absolutely. It was really fun. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks so much, Amber.
Okay, so that's it for this week's episode of Off the Lot. We want to hear from you. If there are any topics you want covered or any questions you'd like answered, please email us at podcast.offthelot@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Instagram and YouTube. Our handles are in the show notes. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And share this with your friends. See you next week.